everybody, and welcome to the first couple episodes, maybe, or first episode. Welcome to the first episode of the Cleansing Our Hearts podcast. I'm your host, Esk. These are my co-hosts, Popsicle and FroBro.
You can tell we planned this, right?
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Today we're talking about our testimonials, a sort of a get to know us, and then maybe in the future we'll see what God has in store for us. So, gentlemen, may I begin?
Go ahead.
All right. So, I grew up in the suburb of Chicago called Arlington Heights. It's to the southwest, I believe. I mainly grew up in a Christian home. I went to something called Awana, if you two know what that is, in my local church, to which I memorized most of the, many, I should say, of the iconic verses. I essentially kind of knew Jesus before I even got to know him, which was definitely a great benefit in the early days of my Christian walk. But then in 2000, my family moved up to Maine in the house that I now reside in. It was during these first couple years that I began to move towards the growing tech in the world. This was back when dial-up was still a thing. I used to play a series of video games called the Backyard Sports Series, where there was baseball, soccer, and football. I hope that these guys know what that is. If you don't, shame on you to go check it out. Very old, great series. But then I found the internet and began playing around with what would become one of my favorite games of all time called RuneScape, and then now called old school RuneScape. I was an avid fan of Flash games also, to which I found a site that led me to newgrounds.com, which basically, unfortunately, there was an adult version, and I was unfiltered. Began my first steps, and that so began my first steps into my addiction. My father also had pornographic images on our desktops that I would frequent, whether he downloaded them or failed to remove them for whatever reason, I do not know, but definitely did not help. But it was also during these first couple of years in Maine, where I live, that I also became saved. And of course, God did not remove that addiction because I was saved, nor did I want to know or know how devastating it would become to even know ahead of time to remove it from my life. I went on to a Christian school for my middle school and high school years, eventually graduating from that school, going on to Full Sail University for music production, which is now being used for this podcast, and the audio side of the Faith Community Discord. As of course, I hope you guys listening know that I edit the Bible studies and whatnot, and I've just been using that to add some, just been using that knowledge to help God's kingdom. But after university, fortunately, I fell back into a teaching position at the school I graduated from, which I was at for about 5 years. But during the time of COVID, I felt very disrespected after I got put in charge of something, and then my authority was completely undermined, that I decided to leave. But during that same exact time, as I was exiting about mid-June, our leader of this Discord, Pace, decided to put this Discord link in the NoFap Christian subreddit. And I'm like, hey, this will probably be better than just lurking, interacting and getting things. I was planning to be a somewhat lurker, chat every so often and figure out things as I was going along. But I figured that the Discord would be better than just a random person. Maybe I can go to a Bible study and hear them, and that would be affecting me better. But after attending some of those few Bible studies on a fateful Saturday when Pace could not teach, I taught using a video from John Piper. And after that, praying, figuring out what I want to do, Pace offered and I accepted the position of a moderator of an amazing community that keeps me looking to fight instead of saying and giving in. And I get to now talk on a podcast with these two great gentlemen who have been awesome to teach with. And that's all I have. That's me. It's amazing how laziness or ignorance can lead so many people into sin, right, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
It's I hope, at least with you guys, that if you guys have children, I should say, that you guys put blockers on as much as you can, so that way your children don't fall.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, so I'm younger than both these two, not by much, but by a couple of years. I'm currently 19. I grew up in Michigan, good old jolly Michigan. I grew up in a small town, population about 5,000, I think, last time it was counted, and I live about 45 miles northwest of Detroit. And this town's quiet. I Most of my friends lived outside, but I grew up. My family is Lutheran, both on my mom and dad's side. So I was always raised in a Lutheran church, and every Sunday I went and heard the organ and the pastor preach, and I went to like kids' church every now and then. But to be honest, I was more intrigued with staying with the adults because I wanted to learn what they were learning about. And life went on, and went to I went to public school for first and second grade, and that's when I got my first introduction into what um porn was. I found a Playboy magazine in the playground, and myself and a couple other kids found it under the slide, and we were intrigued, and we were like, "Oh, this looks fun. This We know it's wrong," so we ended up hiding it, and we had it for about 3 weeks outside, and we hid it until one of the teachers found it, and that was my first time seeing anything like that. And I was intrigued, but it really didn't bother me until about fourth grade. So my parents made the decision to move me to a private Christian school instead of going to public school because they thought it would be better and have it in a controlled environment, so I didn't see anything like that. Well, that didn't exactly go to plan because I started going there third grade, and each year, at least once, I can recall seeing the older kids, specifically the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, pull out their phones and watch something. And I was always intrigued because they'd go into the bathrooms and locker rooms as a group, and then they'd be joking and laughing when they walked out. And one day I was granted access into the locker room because I was going to JV basketball practice and for the school, and I walked in there, and one kid had his tablet up. He had I think it was a iPad, and they were watching porn, and I was intrigued, and they brought me over, and they were like, "This is what you got to watch to be a man." So taking this from my peers, I was like, these are all the my friends and kids that I want to be like. So I went home, and I was intrigued, and they told me this is what it was to be a man. So I looked it up and started watching it, and I really had no use for it. I just wanted to fit in like everybody else, so that the next day when I went to school, I could say, "Hey, you know what? I watched this and I watched this." And I had a very close relationship with the pastor at the school. It was a church and school combined into one. And down the road, I think it was fourth grade when it started. But I started getting bullied real bad in fourth grade by the same kids that were telling me to watch this and watch that to fit in, and yet I wasn't being accepted as one of them. So it was I was not in a good place. I was depressed. I felt alone because I had pretty much the entire school, even my own classmates, making fun of me for stuff I didn't even know what I did wrong for. So I didn't really want to tell anybody about it, so I turned to a therapy that I had found through them, and that was porn. And I started watching that as often as I could to make up for what I was being bullied for, and I had no idea what that was, so I just kept watching more and more of it. And my parents had put blockers on the computer, but being the mischievous one that I was able to figure out how to get around those and even lock my parents out of it within a matter of 10 minutes. So my parents thought they had blocked the computer, but in honesty, I had blocked them out, and they didn't know that. And that went on, and eventually in 5th grade, my parents made the decision to move me to another Christian school because the bullying was just getting so bad, and I was just not happy. I wasn't enjoying school at all. It was making my school performance bad because I could not handle the bullying, and so they moved me to another Christian school. And you would think things would have gotten better, but they didn't. They actually got worse. And so it got worse because instead of just saying stuff and slandering me, it turned into physical altercations where I would be kicked in the back, kicked in the face. I would be slammed up against lockers. I remember specifically one time an 8th grader when I was in 6th grade, he grabbed me by my hair and slammed my head into a locker and said, "Welcome to the big boys." And because of my humor, I just kind of shrugged it off and really didn't care. And I would always hear, it started a little bit in 6th grade where they were telling me that God didn't love me and to go kill myself and yada, yada, yada. But it got real clear in 7th grade that I wasn't wanted there or wasn't loved there, because that pretty much became a daily thing where I was told, go home and kill yourself because God doesn't even love you or want you. And I took that to heart because I had, except for my family, telling me that I was awesome and whatnot, it seemed like I had the rest of the world turned against me. And I just got to a point where I was like, I've had enough of this. And I decided I wrote my family a note explaining why I was going to kill myself. I had written down where I wanted to be buried and everything. And I was going through with it. I was so fed up with the life I was living because I didn't feel like even God wanted me there because that's what I've been told. So my dad was a hunter, and I knew where he kept the firearms. So both my parents were gone. They're at one of my sister's soccer games. And at that moment, I had a breakdown because I received I think it was a Instagram post or something from one of the kids that I didn't belong anywhere and that I should just not show up on Monday because nobody would care if I did or not. And after seeing that, I just decided, I was like, I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of thinking about this. So I grabbed the gun and I put a shell in, and I put it up to my head, and I told myself I was going to count down from 3, and on 1 I was going to pull the trigger because I didn't care. So I did. I went 3, 2, and when I said 1, right before I could pull the trigger, I heard a voice. It called my name, and it startled me because I looked around and there was nobody. Nobody was home. It was just me. And I heard the voice again. It was super clear, it was loud, and it was deep. And it said my name twice. And it startled me, and I knew God would call on people that were in distress. But it took me about a month to realize that was God reaching out to me. I'm a very lucky person to have had an experience like that, but I immediately unloaded the gun, I put it back, and I went and prayed. And when I got back to school, I requested to speak with the pastor, and I told him everything that had been going on in school and the voice I heard, and he talked to the principal, and everybody that was bullying me was instantly punished. And he also spoke with me, and we still speak about it today on the voice, and he believes that that was God realizing that I was serious and that I wasn't going to back out or think twice about what I was doing. So he said it wasn't uncommon, but I have heard God's voice. It's something very hard to explain, especially when people ask why I heard it. I don't like to go into the full reason that I had a gun in my head, but if you think that God isn't real or you're having doubts about if he exists, I'm a living testimony that he does exist, and he reaches out to you. Maybe he reached out to me directly that time, but I have noticed that when I have prayed, he doesn't give me an answer immediately. But looking back, he has answered my prayers many times in ways I did not realize. But after that, it was I left the school a year later for 8th grade, and I decided to go virtual. So all my homework from 8th grade through high school was online because I just did not like people. I didn't trust them enough to work with them and whatnot. So I went online, and that was great. I had no problems. I was struggling in school, and I didn't know why, but I would find out later. And my journey with God, I would study my Bible uh, quite often, and I would pray to him. And I wanted a group of friends because most of my friends that I'd grown up with had moved away. So there's a church that I still attend. It's literally 5 minutes down the road from my house. And I went there for Easter, I think it was, and the pastor said something about a youth group. And I have had my fair share of bad experiences with young Christians, but in this case, after talking with the youth pastor who oversaw it, I decided to make the bold step, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to this youth group because maybe they'll be way different than what I had expected. So I did, and I loved it, and everybody accepted me for who I was. Most of everything that I had done in my past, and they accepted me like no other Christian had done. And I am thankful to that church and that community that they did that. And I have grown in my relationship with God because of them and because of the friends I have from there. And every fall and every winter, we'd go on retreats, and they'd bring a guest speaker to talk with us. And if my favorite one was the one that happened in 2020. We got to do retreat right before a week before COVID shut down the world. And that retreat was probably the one that impacted my heart and my relationship with God the most. Just because the speaker was not who you would expect it to be. And he was so sincere, and they made us do an anonymous survey on stuff such as self-harm, depression, suicide, and porn. And the way it worked is you'd check off a box that had that, and then we folded it up and passed it to around the room. And I'd say we had about 600 kids in the retreat. And when you had someone else's paper, when he would read that off, if the box was checked, you would stand up anonymously for the person who checked it. And I gotta say, when he said porn, I kid you not, every single student stood up. And after he was done with his sermon, we broke off into groups, and it was discussed on how much everybody struggled with this. And I've been struggling with it since I was 9. So I've been battling my war for 10 years now. And it's not been easy until 2015. I didn't actually know I had an addiction. I just was like, oh, I'm watching this. I don't think it's that bad. But in 2015, I realized, what, I got a problem with this. This isn't good. So I joined a website called NoFap, and I have been active on there ever since. And, I remember, I think it was 2016 to 2018, I was clean for 2 whole years. And then my girlfriend cheated on me, and that kind of sent me back into the spiral of lovely, lovely porn. And my addiction with it has been a struggle, and my family has no idea. And but I made a choice in my heart to be in it 100%, and that is something I still struggle with because, with school and life and, the outside world, your heart and your brain won't always work as one. And I have to remind myself to be in it every day 100%, because if I'm not, then Satan will slip into my life and make me fall. And right now, today is my 31st day without porn, and it is amazing. It is a blessing from God. So if any of you are thinking that you are hopeless and it's never going to get better, it is, because in quarantine, I was dying, literally. I was like having a terrible time adapting to being home alone all the time, not being able to go to the gym to get rid of my urges. I mean, there was a couple weeks where it was like every day and even multiple times a day with this struggle. So if you're thinking that this is a battle that you can't overcome, that's false. You can. And just because you can't get past a day or two or even a week does not mean you're a failure. The fact that you can get those few days, even a week, it means that there's progress being made not only in your heart, but in your mind, that you are overcoming that. I read a study it said that the addiction, the dopamine level you get from porn is 10 times more addicting than heroin. So just take that into account. You're not dealing with any other addiction here. You're dealing with the most addicting addiction of all. And if you can overcome that, think about what you can do with your life. If you can overcome this small, well, not a small, but if you can overcome this chasm, if you can find a way to cross this, think of the endless possibilities that you can do. And that's what I realized in my life. I was like, I was always looking, like a week and whatnot, and I realized that I was looking too far ahead. So I take it day by day. I do. I don't look 90 days out. I don't look a year out. I look at the next day. And when I started, I was going hour by hour. That's how I started. I took it hour by hour, then every 2 hours until I got to the point where I was just taking it day by day. And the devil, he tempted me a lot. But I was firm. I went to God and I prayed anytime I had feelings. And if that didn't work, I was doing a lot of push-ups and a lot of sit-ups. So there are methods that you can use, like I have, to overcome what's in your life. But in terms of my life, that's pretty much it. I mean, I've had my deals with bullying, depression, and of course the major one being porn. And but I've overcome so much in my life, and I couldn't have done it without God. So if you're thinking that you're like unworthy or something, none of us are worthy. I'm not worthy. I mean, I've been dealing with this 10 years. I know guys, I have friends that have been dealing with this for 25, 30, 40 years. I mean, we have to look at the big picture. And that is, God loves us and God wants us to be free. He gives us the tools we may not see at the time, but he gives us tools to do what we need to do. To fight urges, to do school, to survive a day at work. Where I worked in manual labor for a year. It was no fun. I was in there at 5:30 in the morning and getting done at 5. It was not fun. And my coworkers were mouth shoved as pigs that the only thing they talked about was porn. And I had to separate myself because it got to the point where they were starting to trigger me from them talking about it, because they would go into such detail on what they watched the night before or what they were going to watch at lunch, because they'd sit in the lunchroom and watch it on their phones. And God gave me a tool. During lunch, a couple of my coworkers would actually go out and pray. They would pray over those guys that were sitting there doing that, and they would pray over being blessed with the day to work and a healthy life so they could work and provide for their family. And I went out there and did that because I was invited. And I could have said no, and I could have listened to that and let it trigger me. But I feel like God gave me a tool, and that tool was my coworker asking me if I would like to come out and pray with them. So that's what I did. God gives you tools. He's given me many tools. Now looking back, I see I skipped a lot of tools because I wasn't paying attention. And now I pay attention in everything I do to make sure that my heart, my mind, and everything I do is godly. And I would like to encourage you to try and do that in your own life. But don't follow off my life example, because I don't want you to have had the same experiences I have, because they've not been the best. But that's my life. It's not been an easy road, but it's been one that I've lived through. So, thank you.
As someone who also grew up in a Christian school, I can tell you that even though it's Christian, the bullying definitely does not stop, and that's okay to deal with. You know, people are sinners, and they're going to be naturally drawn toward that sin no matter what. It's just, it's comforting to hear that someone else went through, albeit not as, I wasn't as bad as you, FroBro, but to anyone who listens to these testimonies, if you're going to a Christian school and you're feeling bullied, it's not
you.
it's not you, it's the sin. It's the sinful world. And that's okay. Tell someone about it. Get it fixed. That's it's the hardest step, but it's the necessary step.
Or if you don't have anyone that you want to talk to in life, send me a message, guys. I'm more than happy to help talk with you about this stuff.
So I grew up in a family that my grandparents were both ministers at some point. So I had ministers on my dad's side, ministers on my mom's side. My parents were Christians. We went to church pretty much every Sunday for as long as I could remember. I think the earliest I remember was when I was like 4. We were going to church, and that was the way life went. So I was pretty fortunate to grow up in a Christian household. I remember when I was 10, my twin sister got saved, and I raised my hand, and I'm like, well, if she's doing it, it must be good, so I'll do it. And of course, I would learn a lot later in life what that actually meant. I remember, I believe I started masturbating when I was 10, and I got pretty much hooked on it at least once a day, not more, not less. Porn didn't really come until I think I was about 14, and even then, I think the most I would ever watch would be like once a month or so, just for the fact that I had a pretty active household, and at the time, my twin sister was going through some rough stuff, and to not give anything away, there'd be many times where she would come in late at night in the kitchen because my room was next to the kitchen. And in hindsight, or at the time, I was like, "Come on, I'm trying to go to sleep. Why are you doing this?" But in hindsight, that prevented me from getting on the computer because the computer was right next to my room in the kitchen. And then, of course, when I got a PS3 in 2007, I got the internet browser. Her coming into the kitchen at those times when I was trying to sleep were actually good because it prevented me from indulging in that kind of stuff. And so I would watch it maybe once every other month or so. It didn't really get bad until after college. When I was 19, I was involved with a woman, and we had sex after a few months of dating. She was a Christian woman and all this stuff. And long story short, it just didn't end well. My problem was my problem was I didn't end it until I found someone else to replace her. So that was mistake number one. And then of course, during that time, I just continued to engage in masturbation, and that drove my relationships. I wouldn't push for sex because, we all knew that was bad. But I would try to push for other things. And I knew it wasn't good, but the pleasure and the high from that is what I really wanted. Of course, that led to putting myself into some situations that were not good. One of those situations turned into assault, and that was pretty difficult to recover from. Now, that was a long time ago. That was about 7-8 years ago. And so, for those listening in, I'm fine now. I did all the counseling. I got the help I needed, and life is good. But back then, that's really kind of what I wanted, and I let my drive for that feeling you get when you ejaculate after masturbating. That's really what I strove for, and ultimately that led to, not only that I put myself in situations that were not good. That also put me in a position to emotionally cheat on my girlfriend about 8 or 9 years ago, and that wasn't good. I think once I did that, that was kind of the start of my walk in the Lord, because I knew it was wrong. I remember specifically praying over and over that I would be able to keep what I had without telling her, but the Lord, in His infinite wisdom and in His infinite love for me, decided that was not going to be the case, which made sense. And 2 days before my college graduation, she removes me from Facebook, and the conversations that we had over text message were very sparse the week before, but I didn't really notice because I was knee deep in exams. I had just failed I didn't fail the class. I got a D in the class because I had to overload for reasons outside of my control for that semester. So 22 hours. And I was trying to clear all that up so I could graduate, which I eventually did. But that 2 days before, that was the major gut check when she just up and left me. And eventually I found out she left me for someone else. And then they broke up 2 months afterwards. So, in hindsight, it didn't really work out for both of us. But, I didn't, in college, after my freshman year, I didn't really go to church unless I was home. Wasn't really involved in Christian community unless I was home. I would try to go for that community, but just busy schedule in my previous life. The big thing for me was, and this is a big takeaway for those of you listening, but I did not put the Lord first. I had a girlfriend, and I'm like, well, that's enough for me. The problem was I overloaded her with burdens that only the Lord can fulfill. And the Lord saw that and said, you need to get closer to me. So I got dumped, graduated college, moved to a new city, got an apartment by myself and a new job, all within 2 months of graduating. And I remember specifically in July, that's like the first weekend in July of 2015, I was sitting there in my apartment. It was furnished. I had what I needed. I had a job, paid the bills and more. But there was something missing. And that's when the Lord really started to speak to me, because that's when I realized church community and the gospel was a lot more important than temporary pleasures. So I was 22 in July 2015 when I decided to give my heart back to the Lord. And I really started to pursue the Lord as best I could. So I started serving. Up until then, I'd served in various churches for years in their tech and sound division. So I did the same with the church in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is where I ended up at for a little bit. The church was great, had great preaching. The problem was there was no singles community there. And I did sound lights and audio, but it was kind of hard to relate to everyone because, well, they were all married, per se. So I spent about 2 years with the married group. And there were many days in which I just didn't want to go. Because obviously I was still looking for a spouse. And to some degree, I still am today. Just not as hard as I did before, because originally when I got dumped, I tried to replace it with, well, with someone.
Anyway, in the recording, if you are listening to the recording, we are back. We have lost our recording bot,
Twice.
and hopefully we'll continue with Popsicle's testimony.
Okay. Where was I before? It was... Yeah, so basically, for 2 years, I was at a church without a singles ministry, and searching for a spouse, but couldn't find any. So I basically just joined a married couples Bible study, and yeah, just ran with that for 2 years, and that taught me a lot, because they shared struggles that I didn't really think about when you're married. Because a lot of people think, oh, well, you're married, it's life's over, life's good, you've reached the pinnacle of Christianity, which is obviously not the case at all. But marriage is not the ultimate goal for your life as a Christian. But of course, we can talk about what that is at another date. But yeah, I did that for 2 years, and then I felt calling to go to Charlotte, North Carolina. Not because I worked there, not because it would take me an hour to get there and back, but I just felt it was the Lord calling me there, and that's where He wanted me to be. So in 2017, I'm like, all right, let's go. So there was a guy in my workplace. His name was Zach. He's a non-believer. We had a good friendship and teamed up with him, and we moved in to an apartment. And during that time was when I got my first relationship since that dreadful breakup, and it went pretty well for like 3 or 4 months, and then we parted ways because there's this things that we couldn't really reconcile, and I'm not going to go into detail on what that was, but during that time I got a taste for what leading a godly relationship would look like. And during that time I still struggled with masturbation, obviously, every day. But in 2018 I started to make a change. I went from every day to maybe every 2 to 3 days. So masturbate once every 2 or 3 days. And I'd known this was a sin for a while, and I knew it was causing and fueling things in relationships with women for a while as well. And that's when I really started to make an effort to stop. A few months after that relationship ended, I got presented with another opportunity. She was a doctor, and she lived in Tennessee, and I was in North Carolina. So we would each drive about 2 hours to go meet up in a place called Asheville, North Carolina, mountain town. And then she came to Charlotte once, and I went to Tennessee once. And that relationship went really well. It was the first time I felt in a long time that, well, I led that relationship with the gospel to the best of my ability. And that was the first time I had ever felt in a relationship that it was the right thing to do. Because in most relationships, I'm like, okay, what do I do to avoid trying to touch her? What do I do to avoid trying to put us in a spot where we might be able to flirt or experiment or something? And I was really trying to avoid that. And that was very helpful for me because she was very encouraging. She gave me some good ideas. Ultimately, though, that relationship ended because she just didn't have time. And as a doctor, working 60, 80 hours a week, that made sense. And that happened in 2019, and I've been single ever since. And so let's go a year and a half later. I'm at a good church, making a lot of money. I'm debt free, and this was March of 2020. Still struggle with masturbation. And this is 15, 16 years at this point. And I'm not doing it every day. I'm doing it like 3 to 4 days now instead of 2 to 3. So every 3 to 4 days, masturbate once. And I kept wondering, why do I keep struggling with this? And why did I, what was I doing wrong? I mean, I don't really, And that's when I realized I wasn't getting into the Word as much as I should. So I started reading the Bible every day. And because I was in God's Word every day, that gave me the tools to start to fight. And so I started fighting. I never really fought temptation before when it came to masturbation and lust. But when I first started fighting, it felt really good because now I'm actually doing something against that sin. So then masturbation went from once every 3 to 4 days to now we're at maybe once every week or two. And it's getting a lot better. The fight is real, but it's a fight that can be won. And daily reading in the Word has also given me a lot of insight as to how to teach the gospel, which makes sense. Spend time in the Word every day, and that increases your knowledge of the gospel. Increased knowledge of the gospel leads to better understanding of how to help people. And once you kind of get that understanding of how can you help people in their struggles, that in turn can also help you to fight sin. And because of that, I've been able to have victory over pornography. I think I'm at month 5 now, or maybe month 4. Yeah, it's about month 4. It's been over 120 days since I last watched pornography. And that's one of the reasons why I joined the server. I didn't think I could stop on my own. And my church friends weren't that helpful at the time. I remember joining the server as like a joke. I'm like, I'm not going to do anything. And then I started observing them, people gathering for prayer night. I'm like, what's this? And I joined in one time. And there was a dude who basically, right there, offered up his addiction to, I think it was masturbation. And when he did that, I wasn't bewildered by it. Until a person came on to help this young man in his struggle. The person that came on was a woman helping a man with masturbation. And when I heard that, I'm like, you gotta be joking. I didn't think that, growing up in the Southern Baptist culture, that was expressly forbidden. They kept men and women so far apart, it was very difficult to figure out how to interact with them. But to see a woman helping a man with his addiction to lust, that just baffled me. But it also gave me courage. Because for a long time, I've been looking for a place to share my struggles. And so I'd get the chance to do it at the next Bible study. There was a guy who wanted encouragement. To giving him encouragement for whatever he was struggling with. I forget what it is. or what it was, I started sharing some of my struggles. And of course, that's when I shared that I was sexually assaulted. I didn't really think about it when I shared it. I was more concerned with being what do you call it? I was more concerned with helping the brother that was struggling in sin, that suddenly it didn't really matter what my story was. What mattered more was, how can we encourage this young man or woman? How can we, through the events that happen in our lives, how can we be a blessing to others? How can we, as Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens with love? And I think that was the first time. And of course, after that, they started calling for help. For the server, pasted a call. Call number 2 went out in the middle of September. Again, I ignored it because of, well, reasons I've listed already. Call number 3 comes out towards the end of September, and I looked at it, and I said, they've been doing this for about a month, and I was honestly surprised, because why weren't people answering the call? And that's when it hit me. What if the call was for me? As soon as I thought about that, I sent a message to ask, and they set up a meeting. And then before long, I remember logging in, or I was on my phone, just watching videos, and I see a dude named Pace text me something in green letters. I'm like, this has to be some sort of joke. I log into my phone, I see like all these restricted areas. Not knowing how Discord worked, I'm like, is someone playing a trick? Then I saw our leadership chat. That's when I knew that my petition had been granted. And that was something I've been wanting to do for a long time. For years, in fact. So just because you pray for something for years and it hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean that God has forgotten you. I prayed for that opportunity for 5-6 years. And that's how long it took. So don't give up on prayer. Continue to pursue the Lord in all circumstances. And then above all else, give God the glory, honor, and praise in all circumstances. For it's better to be, in my opinion, it's better to be with the Lord Jesus, to live a life for his kingdom, than it would be to be living among the world.
That's actually well known. I've seen that a couple of times from the churches I went to, that it says, I would rather stand against the world and be with Jesus than be without him and live in the world. And I'm with you on that one, Popsicle. I would rather be hated and judged by the world, but be loved unconditionally by my Father in heaven.
Amen to that.
Well, I for one am glad that both of you are a part of the leadership team in this Discord, frankly. I'm glad I got to be there to interview you and see you guys grow since then. But ultimately, let's have some final thoughts. What can we take away from each other's testimony? I know that my takeaway is that even though we have this great community of Christians in this world, we're still so prone to fall into sin and keep it away from each other. And that's what we have to do to start the journey, is we have to bring it out and say, I have this problem. Where can I start practically doing this and continuing to grow spiritually so that way I can beat this from both ends, both in my soul and in the physical realm? And
That's
the fact that, we can have someone, FroBro, you grew up in a Christian academy just like I did. Popsicle, you grew up in a Christian home just like I did. I mean, I'm going to assume FroBro did too. But it's amazing how Satan's power is just so to keep us so silent, to keep us in this sin is so great. But yet it's even greater when we can come out and say, I have this problem. I need someone else to stand on. It says in Ecclesiastes that a man cannot stand alone. He needs another person, and he will not fail because that person will pick them up. I just that's my takeaway from this, guys.
I guess my takeaway is we all have different lives, but we all have similarities that we can use to relate to each other. I mean, I can relate to Popsicle with a lot of things. I've got ADD, ADHD, CAPD, and I got another genetic condition that hinders me mentally and physically. And it's called Klinefelter's. And so my
heard before.
What?
That is something I'll not heard before. I'll have to look that up later.
Yeah, so it's actually quite common. 1 in 400 guys have it, and so it's actually a higher number, but only about a quarter of them know they have it. And what it is my body does not produce testosterone at all naturally, so I have to take a weekly injection to keep my testosterone levels at bay. And that's why I always struggled in school, is because I did not have the testosterone in my brain to learn what I needed to for school. So I was always about 4 years behind everybody else, but I pushed myself because I knew I actually didn't know this until I had this until 2018 when I got tested for it. But I was like, oh, that makes more sense. That's why I struggled for so many years. And my doctor was honestly amazed that I had gotten this far in life. But I'm self-taught in everything because my teachers wouldn't spend the time with me to teach me everything. So in everything, I'm self-taught, especially in math, which is why when I do math, I have a weird way of deducing things. It's because my brain figured out a way for me to do it not the right way, but it's my way. So I have been trying to retrain and relearn that
well, to be
for
fair,
college. So
sorry to interrupt you, but to be fair, math is just more of a set of rules. How you get from point A to point B is entirely up to you.
yeah, but I always got nicked on that because my teachers would always nitpick on, oh,
Well,
that's not the right way to do it. And I was like, oh, come on, I got the answer.
That's because like a lot of teachers are taught that way, and we think that it's the only way. Instead of realizing that math is actually just a set of rules, and you can do one problem 10 different ways.
Yeah.
Depends on which rule you decide to start with.
Yeah, that's what I found out. And but yeah, that I was like, oh, so that's why I struggled in school. And then I was good at sports, but I wasn't like the best athlete, and I was always wondering on that one too. But because I had no testosterone, I couldn't build muscle. I didn't have the endurance, but I actually held my own in a lot of things, and it was just there's some complications, like the fertility rate for guys with Klinefelters is very low. My doctor told me I had about a 1% chance of having kids, and I don't want kids personally, so that really doesn't bother me.
At least right now.
Yeah,
Let's see where the Lord takes you.
no, that will not change. And so no offense to any people that have kids or want kids, I just don't personally want them. No offense, but and we also have some other things, like we have an increased risk of getting some cancer and whatnot. So it should be it's an interesting life, and but it's I had somebody ask me, they were like, would you replace your life if you didn't have this? And I'm like, you mean would I want to live a different one? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, no. And he was like, well, why not? And I'm like, because everything I have overcome in my life has proven to myself what I can do and what I'm capable of with God by my side. So if you're, I don't know how many of y'all have learning disabilities or something, or think that you're different. We're not all meant to be like clones from Star Wars. We're not all meant to be the exact same thing. Why do you think snowflakes are all different? Fingerprints are different.
To be fair, the clothes aren't even all the same. Watch the Clone Wars; they all have a different personality.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know. It's called the defects.
Bad Batch.
Bad Batch, yeah.
I only say that because I'm currently watching through the Clone Wars right now. After the 3rd episode of Mandalorian, I'm like, okay, I gotta learn who that character is. So I'm just like, I guess
you gotta. Well, you gotta watch
the Clone Wars.
You gotta binge watch the Clone Wars, and you gotta binge watch Star Wars Rebels, because that has some character lead-ins.
Yes, I heard about some characters coming back in that.
So
I'm just glad I got through the Night Sisters arc, so that way I know that I finally know how said person came back at the end of the Night Sisters arc, so that way I can be excited when he comes back into the show in a future season.
Maybe we should stop the podcast if we're going to talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, all right. Back to the main thing. But
back to the main thing.
If you guys are not, everybody's unique, and God created us to be unique. So, and that's because He gave us all each something for us to give to the world. For me, it's, I don't know, I haven't found it yet, but I may not find it for 10 years. I may not find it for 20 years, but we each have something to give to this world. It may be similar to what someone else is giving to the world, but it's not the exact same. Just think about that. You are a snowflake in the world. There are many people that are similar to you, but no one is exactly like you. So just remember that God created you that way. And no matter what anybody else says, you have family here that supports you, and you have a Father in heaven that cares for you, He loves you, and He encourages you, and He is watching over you in everything that you do. So,
Popsicle, what's your takeaway from our 3 testimonies?
Everyone's story is different. Some may struggle more than others. A perfect analogy would be some may have to carry more bricks than others. But at the end of the day, we're all dumping our bricks into the same well. And that is casting all of our burdens, troubles, struggles, desires, hopes, dreams. We're all putting them on the shoulders of the only man, the only God that can handle those things. And that is the Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope that you continue to enjoy us in the future as we continue to produce these. Thank you for listening. and may God bless your day.